What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Steven Thompson, here with my partner, Jack Markowski. I'm here at the Petersen Events Center. We just watched the Panthers pick up a pretty dramatic, pretty crucial win over Virginia Tech. Their 15-point winner, 79-64. It was a little dicey in the first half. They entered halftime tied, I believe, at 36 with the Hokies, and they come out with a dominant effort in the second half to pull away and bounce back for another big win. In the ACC, they avoid falling in the ACC standings. You have to imagine they hold on the NCAA tournament bubble, but we'll get into that in a second. There's some interesting projections coming out immediately after that game. But Jack, how huge was it to win this game, to bounce back like they did, especially after the way that Wake Forest game went? I mean, we were on here talking about how that was one of their worst losses of the season, and they come back and play one of their better games of the season here against Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete feel-good win. I think it washes away a lot of the bad feelings from the Wake Forest loss, maybe not from a resume perspective, but that's a different discussion. Like you said, I think a loss tonight probably would have eliminated their at-large hopes, and they really needed to have this one. And then in consideration of the ACC standings with NC State, Syracuse, and Wake Forest all winning, keeping pace with those teams, sticking around the fifth seed in the conference is huge. And Florida State's down big to Clemson, so that's another team that they're going to separate from. And getting back to the game, Virginia Tech, that's a tough opponent. They're coming off of a blowout win against Virginia. I thought they played very well in the first half. The Hokies did. I think you could argue they outplayed Pitt at sometimes. Padula took over. He had 14 points. Bub being in foul trouble, not having his defensive presence especially really hurt them. Pitt turned the ball over 7 times, and then you saw that flip switch in the second half where it was one of the best halves they've played all season. And I think you have to give credit to Capel and the team for regrouping in halftime and adjusting. Pitt tightened up on defense. They outscored the Hokies by 15. Virginia Tech couldn't make a shot from behind the arc. And I think a big part of that was Jalen Lowe's impact. I mean, you can't say enough about the ways that he's developed. Having a lead freshman guard who has this kind of impact, this kind of poise, playmaking ability, doing it all while he looks like a 4-year senior it's pretty remarkable. I think you could argue he's been Pitt's second best player since the start of their hot streak that showed up again tonight. He had 18 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds. Blake Hinson was great, bounced back from one of his worst games of the season with 22 points. Hunter Couture, that's a big notch for the defense, stopping him. He came in averaging 14 points, only had 7. He fouled out tonight. And then the last player I want to highlight is Ish Leggett, who continues to excel in that sixth-man role. He's a model of consistency, 13 points on 6 of 12 shooting. Since the road win against Duke, and this also stands for low two, he's only had 1 game where he's finished with single-digit points. So the team is clicking. They had a little bit of a fluke, I guess you could say, against Wake Forest, but this is, who we've come to expect them to be in recent weeks over the past month and a half or so. And I think it's really great for their morale and really for building momentum with the regular season and ACC tournament looming.
Yeah, and I mean, this is who this team has been all year. They've been the bounce back kids. They've been the comeback kids. They, every time they've been met with some adversity, every time they look like they're kind of headed towards a downward spiral, they pulled themselves out of it almost immediately. You think about, early in the season, losing to Florida, getting dominated the way that they did in that game. And then, they go on a bit of a streak where they're losing to Clemson and, they really get off to a slow start in ACC play. But they rebounded every time. Jeff Capel pointed out today that they got beat pretty bad here against Duke and Syracuse, and then they go on the road and they win against Duke, and that kicks off this recent hot streak as well. This is just who they've been all year. When they've been faced with some adversity, when they've been down, when you start to kind of count them out a little bit, that's when the Panthers play their best game. And I think that's kind of just who they are. They love to make things a little bit harder on themselves. They love when things get a little bit difficult, and they love when the bright lights are on them. You saw, I think, beginning of the game, you could feel the energy in this place. It was, I believe, a sellout crowd, if not close to it, more than 12,000 in attendance today. That's a season record, a season high for attendance at the Pete. You could just feel the energy. And the Panthers kind of reflected that in those first few minutes. They jumped out to a 7-0 lead. And then you could start to see them kind of I don't know, not rest on their laurels, but kind of think that they had the game won already, that they were going to drive this team out of the gym really quickly. And they started to get a little cute with it. I think about a couple missed dunks by Zack Austin, some careless turnovers, like you pointed out. And then once the game got kind of close, they locked in. And after it was tied at halftime, I believe it was even remained a 1 or 2 possession game through the first about 4 minutes of the second half. And then they just start dominating. They just start knocking down some threes. They moved the ball really well. They defended with a ton of intensity again, and they pulled away in the second half. And like you said, this is critical. I mean, the rest of this middle of the pack in the ACC is playing pretty well right now. I mean, there are a lot of teams that are rising quickly and notching some important wins. Wake Forest had a huge win today, but the Panthers are able to keep pace with these guys, and they're still within range of the third seed as possibly in the ACC with 4 games left, and they're definitely within range, just only a game back of that 4th seed and that coveted double bye in the ACC tournament. So a big win in that sense, and the Panthers really get back on track after a kind of a big letdown in a big game against Wake Forest. So how they got to this big win over Virginia Tech, I feel like you look at the front court really, and Zack Austin in particular, he was outstanding today. I really want to make sure we highlight him because he was really phenomenal. Probably the best game that he's played in a Pitt uniform. I think he was flirting with a double-double before the first half was even over. He finished with 9 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 blocks. 5 blocks and a steal. Only 1 turnover. He was 4 of 8 from the field, 1 of 2 from 3. This was about as ideal a Zack Austin game as Pitt could have hoped for. I felt like what kind of impact does Zack Austin have in your mind when he is playing this well, when he's doing all those energy things, rebounding, playing defense like the way he did?
Yeah, I mean, he's an absolute game changer. I think all year he's been a versatile defender who's played a huge part in this team's success, especially defensively. The numbers don't always reflect it necessarily, but I think we saw like what he can truly be. He turned it all the way up tonight, especially as a rim protector. He had 5 blocks, which is pretty ridiculous, especially for someone who's not always around the rim, isn't a traditional big. And some of them were, I mean, just awe-inspiring. I don't know if there's a better way to put it. He had a couple on Padula, who was really, dominant in the first half, like we said before. He was a big part of sort of keeping him in check at times when Bub wasn't in the game in that first half. And, I think it is one of the best games he's played as a Panther. Like you said, I don't think there's any doubt about it. He's been a great asset to the front court. He had 14 rebounds too, which that's the second highest total of his career. If I had to guess, I think it's probably the highest of any Panther this year. It's definitely up there. And then on offense, he had 9 points. There were a couple of dunks that he missed that could have padded that total. So I think really all year he's been an unsung hero. He flies under the radar at times. It's just a matter of him showing up consistently. And I think he's a indispensable part of this team out on the wing and in the front court. I think you hope that he can continue to provide this sort of spark. He's a big energy guy when he's really going right. And that's what this team needs. He embodies how this team wants to play and also how they want to win. So seeing him really emerge tonight, especially after a rough performance against Wake Forest, really made all the difference in the world, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a good point about the energy and about the motor. Like, I think this is sustainable for him. I mean, he's probably not going to get 14 rebounds a game. He's probably not going to block 5 shots, but he can get close to those numbers when, as Jeff Capel put it, he has the motor on all the time. You mentioned it earlier in the season when he got removed from the starting lineup. Seems like he reclaimed it a little bit and also kind of found a niche. He found what he's good at. He found what his role is on this team. And once he did, he kind of took off and he became a really valuable guy. I think I'd kind of imagined he'd be a better scorer when he, committed to Pitt and when he first arrived, but he's been a fantastic glue guy for them. He's not always scoring a ton of points. I doubt he'll score 9 points very often. That's kind of a high total for him. But if he's doing all the other stuff, if he's rebounding, if he's blocking a couple shots, if he's playing good perimeter defense and helping command things in that way, he's a perfect fit in this team. I mean, this team has scores. You need those guys to be on, but they need guys like Austin to do the dirty work a little bit. And, like Jalen Lowe and Jeff Capel said, he's capable of doing this all the time. And if he can do this all the time, Pitt is not only that much better of a defensive team, but, he's a great lob threat as well. He helps them offensively in a lot of ways too. So, Austin, he is, like you said, a game changer when he is on like this. And sticking in the front court, I mean, I feel like another thing that has really helped the Panthers kind of continue on this hot streak to get back into contention after a slow start in ACC play has been the play of their bigs, their centers, throughout this hot streak. I mean, it seems like Federico and Diaz Graham are both kind of finding their roles as well, playing a little bit better, and it's helped kind of keep some better success for the team as a whole. I mean, the front court was a pretty glaring weakness, but I feel like they've turned a corner a little bit, and they've really found something that works, and a rotation that works, a distribution of minutes that works. Where do you see this front court now? Do you have a different opinion of them now than you did maybe earlier in the season? Because we were talking about them as one of the biggest weaknesses, if not the biggest weakness on this team just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there was definitely times, towards the start of early in ACC play where it was super rough. And I think they've turned a corner during this hot streak. There's been a lot more positives to take away as the season has progressed. And of course, that's a positive sign. They played well tonight after a rough outing against Wake Forest, and also against a team in Virginia Tech that on paper isn't a particularly favorable matchup for them. I mean, they have Ling Kidd, who averages 13 points. He's a force down low. They held him to 8. Robbie Barron, who's more of a stretch big, but can still do some stuff down low. He only had 4, also picked up 4 fouls, and Myles Poteet scored 10. But overall, I think Federico and Diaz Graham really held their own. I think they showed improvements in their post defense, didn't require many double teams, which at times has opened up looks at on the perimeter for opposing teams. And I think them being able to stand in and really hold their own made a big difference. They had strong positioning, strong anchor when they were being backed down. And I think they forced some pretty bad looks and bad misses at the rim too throughout the night. And then if offensively too, I thought Federico may have had one of the best games of the year. He only scored 2 points. You're not going to get much more out of him in that regard. And that's, it is what it is. I don't think that's a negative against him either. I think, there were times where as a screener and as a passer, he was finding guys out on the perimeter. He was operating as a playmaker, as funny as that may sound. And really, he came away with 3 offensive rebounds too. And he put together a complete performance, and sort of his progression this year reminds me somewhat of what he did last year, where there were times early where it was kind of rough, and then he became the defensive anchor of a tournament team. I think he's sort of progressing to that point now. He's been inconsistent, but still, I think his improvements have been, a huge plus for Pitt. And then Diaz Graham was also impressive defensively. And then he shined where you expect him to as a shooter. He was 2 of 3 from behind the arc, scored 8 points. It's his 4th straight game with a 3. And when he's going right, I mean, having another shot maker for a team that relies on jump shots, on their 3-point shooting, it just adds a whole nother dynamic to the offense. So, you see these kinds of performances, and you can add Austin in too. And it provides a glimpse into what this unit can be. Of course, like I said before, there's still, inconsistencies. There's some matchups where they may not, play too well. And it is what it is. But, if they can somewhat tap into this on a regular basis, Pitt operates at a different level when these guys are going right. Then it really shows with, nights like tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most impressive part was the defense, because it was clear from the jump that Virginia Tech was going to try to target Pitt's bigs. They saw them as a weakness, especially on the defensive end. You saw not just Kidd, but Poteet as well, trying to back down Federico early. And Federico, I think, held them to misses on, I want to say, 3 of their first 4 shots from the bigs inside the paint. He forced them to bring in Poteet and give them a little bit more size. And still, I give Diaz Graham a ton of credit. Federico faced some foul trouble in this game, and you could see as soon as Diaz Graham in, I mean, everyone kind of, it clicks in their head when they see, 265-pound Poteet come in to face and square off against, 220, which I think is pretty generous for Diaz Graham. And you see them start to match up. I mean, even early, Pitt was putting Blake Hinson and Zack Austin on Poteet to start, and then leaving Diaz Graham off to help. Like, even they thought, maybe this is not a great matchup for him, but he really held his own in the second half, and it was it was invaluable for him to be in there, to be able to hold his own. I think he had 1 or 2 blocks, but he was just being solid. He wasn't getting moved as easily. He was affecting shots with his length. It was reminiscent, I think, of how Diaz Graham played in the first 4 game last year against Mississippi State when he was matched up on Tolu Smith, another big physical, a big physical center. But it was also reminiscent of the Duke game as well when they faced Kyle Filipowski. Like these guys are capable of not getting pushed around, of standing up with some of these physical centers that they'll face pretty often in the ACC. From Filipowski to Efton Reed, Armando Bacot, and on and on and on. And this time they really met the moment. They were up to the challenge physically and mentally, and they played really, really well. And I thought that was a big reason why Pitt was able to hang on and why they were able to start that 18-0 run in the second half. It started with some interior defense from those 2 guys. So and then obviously, Diaz Graham giving them a scoring punch was huge as well, especially with Fetty on the bench for so long. So I feel like they've turned a corner. I said that a little bit earlier, but I just love the way that they've kind of found their roles, that they are, they don't seem as thin in the front court as they used to. And I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but when these guys are playing up to their potential, Pitt doesn't really have many holes, that you can exploit. I feel like Federico is can be one of the better defensive centers in the ACC. He was last year. Diaz Graham gives you a nice scoring punch as well. And then Austin's your glue guy, your energy guy. If those guys can continue to kind of keep this kind of play up and find some consistency with this stuff, then Pitt's a much more dangerous team than I think we've seen at any point really this year. We do have to talk about one thing. I did mention the foul trouble as well. That was a pretty big factor for both sides in this game. And I mean, Mike Young, head coach of Virginia Tech, even talked about it in the postgame. You could tell it was one of those things where he really wanted to talk about the officiating, but knows that when he says something in public, he's going to get fined for it. So he wanted to save himself a little bit of money. But what he did say was basically that coaches shouldn't have to deal with this. I mean, one of his better players, Hunter Couture, faced some foul trouble. So did Sean Padula, that kept him on the bench for extended periods. But on Pitt's side, I mean, Federico faced foul trouble. Ish Leggett faced foul trouble. Bub Carrington faced foul trouble. And I thought Carrington having to spend so much time on the bench, especially in the first half, was really killer. He's a great defender. He was doing a good job on Padula, but Padula really started to get hot when Carrington had to go to the bench early. I believe he picked up 2 fouls. I want to say before the 15-minute mark. I think even earlier than that. And so he spent extended minutes on the bench, and that kind of allowed Padula to really get going. What did you make of the whistle? Did you see kind of the same thing as Mike Young seemed to see? Did you think the calls were a little the whistle was a little bit too aggressive? I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I thought there were a lot of ticky-tack calls, honestly. I mean, I'm not, an expert. It's hard sort of to tell sometimes, if the officials are being a little excessive. It's hard to get a feel for if the calls are warranted or not. But yeah, I mean, 41 fouls tonight, 21 on Pitt, 20 on Virginia Tech, and it changed the tide of the game. You look at the second half when Pitt went on that huge run, 18-0 run, that coincided with Padula, Couture, and Robbie Barron all having or being close to fouling out. Barron and Couture had 4, Padula had 3. Around that time, that altered the way they defended. I think that was a major catalyst for Pitt and encouraged them to pick up the pace, be more aggressive, and it worked out. And then on the Panthers end, like you said, Bub Carrington not playing for a majority of the first half, that sort of unlocked Padula. That allowed him to take control of the game, really operate Virginia Tech's offense to the point where they had multiple runs where they made 5 shots in a row. They shot 50%. So, yeah, I mean, I can't blame Mike Young for being openly mad about it. I think it was excessive. Sort of reminded me of Pitt's game on the road against Duke earlier in the year, where it felt like every dribble drive there was a call, and players weren't allowed to get away with anything. So, officiating like that can change how a game turns out. I think that is sort of what happened tonight. And yeah, I mean, there's not really much else to it.
Yeah, and I think my biggest issue was the inconsistency. Like you can call a tight game, you can let a lot go, but it's got to be one or the other. Like you can't have games where okay, in the first half, we're going to call a bunch of ticky-tack stuff. We're going to keep things in control. We're going to not allow a lot of contact. And then, seemingly in the middle of the half, you're calling a completely different game, or you're calling different things on different ends. I don't think the whistles favored one team in particular. I mean, like you said, it was 20-21 in terms of fouls. Virginia Tech had one more. But, I mean, both sides kind of had to deal with it. But it was just – I don't know. When you leave things like that to officiating, when the officiating is so inconsistent, it really does not only change the flow of the game. Obviously, it slows things down, but it also just, like Mike Young said, I mean, it takes some of the best players in the game off the floor. When you're taking Bub Carrington and Ish Leggett off the floor for extended periods, when you're taking Padula and Hunter Couture, I mean, it's just not full teams playing. And if guys foul out, if guys are committing fouls, that's one thing. But I think you're spot on that there was a bunch of ticky-tack stuff that didn't need to be really called. I mean, it's not like this game was getting really chippy. It's not like guys were, being overly aggressive. There weren't any flagrant calls or anything like that. There was nothing to keep in line, and they just continued to blow those whistles and drag the game down into a place that it didn't really need to go. It got slow at times. It was just unnecessary, and it did kind of, it doesn't mar the win for anyone. I mean, a win is a win, but I think in Mike Young's eyes, this just wasn't Virginia Tech at their full strength. It wasn't them at their best, and I can understand why he would be upset about that. But either way, like I said, a win is a win. Pitt gets a big win. We talked a little bit about where they are in those ACC standings, and a little bit about their bubble project, their NCAA tournament odds now after picking up a win and getting back on track. How do you feel about this Panthers? We'll talk about the ACC tournament first. How far do you think they can climb up those standings? Can they get that double bye? Can they reach that third seed even? Or do you kind of expect them to hold in this middle of the pack and play on that second day?
So I think the most realistic, the ceiling for them might be the fourth seed. I think it might prove tough to, catch up to Virginia or whoever ends up in the third spot. But Wake Forest, I think, is still within the realm of possibility of catching up. They have a relatively easy schedule, Wake does. I'm not sure how the tiebreakers would work out because each team won one against the other. But I think, Pitt still, if they have their eyes set on running the table, I don't think a double bye is out of the question at all. They're sitting in fifth right now, tied with NC State. And I think that would be a good outcome for Pitt. That's where they were last year, won the game against Georgia Tech, then went on to the NCAA tournament. So I think the biggest thing for them, and this has been the case for a while, but earlier in the year, it looked like they might, play on Tuesday. They might be a bottom 3 or 4 team in the ACC standings. I think they've pretty much locked themselves into a one-round bye. If that's not official, I think it will be soon enough. So I think they're in a pretty good place. I think a double bye isn't completely unrealistic, but at this point, I think they probably should have their hopes set on, sticking in that 5 spot.
Yeah, honestly, I'm a little more optimistic. I mean, I see Virginia as a team that's lost 3 of their last 4, 2 in a row as well. I think Wake is going to end up actually leapfrogging them. I think Wake is playing really well. They're going to hit their stride heading into the NCAA tournament. I feel like they're going to end up getting that 3rd seed, and Virginia falls back to that 4 seed and maybe even lower. I mean, they're only separated by 2 games from Virginia. I think it's absolutely possible that they climb up to that 4 seed. How likely it is, I mean, you got a bunch of teams that are playing well right now. I feel like Clemson, like you said, as we record this, they're up big on Florida State, but that could – I think they could be in contention for that as well. But, I mean, Pitt's playing as well as anyone. I mean, the Wake Forest loss, I think, has colored a lot of people's view of them. It has kind of sunk them in a lot of people's eyes. But, I mean, you still look at the bigger picture, and I believe that's 7 wins in their last 9 games for the Panthers. So there's still this still kind of counts as a hot streak for them. Like, I don't see the Wake Forest game as a reset on anything. I think they're still playing as well as anyone in the country, and they've got a really manageable schedule down the stretch as well. 3 of their last 4 coming at home, and a road trip to Clemson, or actually, no, 2 of their last 4 at home. I forgot about that Boston College game, but I mean, their toughest game is a road trip to Clemson. That'll be difficult. That's coming up next. But then you travel to Boston College and you get 2 more against NC State and Florida State at home to close out the year. Those are those are games that I think 3 of those 4 games the Panthers should win. And they are damn close to finishing with, they have 9 ACC wins now. They could have 12 by the end of the year. I mean, I think that's Virginia has 11 right now. I haven't looked at their schedule particularly closely, but for a team that's sliding the way that they are, I think it's totally reasonable to think that Pitt could end up tied with them in ACC wins with 12 by the end of the year, and Pitt would have that tiebreaker of Virginia Tech because of the head-to-head wins. So I'm not ruling out that 4th seed. Certainly, I think it's most likely that they kind of fall into that 5 or 6 range, depending on how the tiebreakers work out. But they are still playing really good basketball at the right time, and I think they're going to head into the ACC tournament. Not only with some momentum, but with a pretty favorable spot in the standings. There's another tournament to think about. Panthers still kind of clinging on to that NCAA tournament bubble with a win. It's kind of all we've been talking about over the past few weeks. Joe Lunardi released a new round of bracket predictions immediately following the Panthers win over Virginia Tech here at the Pete. He didn't have them on the bubble. He had them on the bubble when the day began, but he has dropped them after a win. Do you think that was just kind of an oversight on Lunardi's part, or are the Panthers still kind of falling back of the NCAA tournament field, even with a win tonight over Virginia Tech?
Yeah, that was an interesting move. There were a couple of teams around Pitt's spot on the bubble, like Cincinnati and Iowa, who lost and either stayed in their place, maybe even moved up. So, I think tonight's win definitely boosts Pitt's resume. I would say that even though Lunardi took them out of consideration, they're realistically still in that next 4-out mix. And it all comes down to what they do against Clemson, right? I mean, that's an NCAA tournament lock at this point. They're around like the 5 seed, 6 seed line. Winning against them on the road, picking up another quad 1 opportunity, it would be their 4th win in quad 1. I think you would see them moved up, among bracketologists around the country. And really, in their other 3 remaining games, I think you sort of have to, win out if you really want to feel good about your chances going into the ACC tournament. And maybe winning out all 4 of them gets you to a position where you're in that first 4-out or something like that, and a win in the ACC tournament gets you in the field like last year. So there's a lot of possibilities for Pitt. I think you have to still feel pretty good about their standing because, in all honesty, they control their own destiny. So, it does depend on how they play the rest of their season, how much they're going to have to do in the ACC tournament to really play themselves into the legit conversation again after the Wake Forest loss. But I don't think there's any doubt that they're still hanging around on the bubble and that, they should not be overlooked, especially with some key opportunities still coming up.
Right. I think we looked at the schedule after that Louisville game. There were 6 games left. There were 6 games left. And I think you kind of said to yourself, okay, they win out. They're definitely in because they would pick up big wins over Wake Forest and over Clemson, and then finish the year with, I believe it would have been 23 ACC wins at that point, which I think definitely gets you in. I think you said they could go 5-1 and give themselves a really good shot. 4-2, you're still breathing, but you would still need some help. You'd still need to make a run in the ACC tournament. And I still think that's true. I mean, even after a big loss to Wake Forest, and that wasn't a good one, it was a pretty big blemish on their resume now. But I mean, I don't think it changes anything in my mind. I mean, I felt like I was definitely saying to myself, you can afford to drop a game to a Wake Forest. You can afford to drop a game to a Clemson and still give yourself a great chance of making a run to the NCAA tournament and building a resume that's worthy of the NCAA tournament. I mean, they're on pace to get more than 20 wins, which I feel like is, for a Power 5 team, is mostly the magic number that you need to give yourself a chance to get an at-large bid by the time the regular season is over. And Pitt, like I said, could finish with 21 or 22, I believe, if they win out. They're at 18 right now. I think they can still play their way in. I don't think they need a ton of help from everyone else. I agree with you. I think they control their own destiny, and that Wake Forest loss didn't really change a whole lot of that, especially seeing the way that they bounced back in this game. I mean, it would have been a problem if they had dropped this game. I felt like this was a must-win coming into it, but the Panthers won, and they've earned the right to stay breathing, and I think they've earned a little bit of a better break than maybe what Lunardi is giving them right now. I know he's not the end-all, be-all. He's not the selection committee, and he's not the only bracketologist out there, but To drop them after a win doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, especially when there weren't a ton of bubble teams who picked up massive wins, especially bubble teams kind of within their range today. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense, but we'll see how it goes. The Panthers, their next game, arguably one of the biggest of the season. I mean, that's just the time of year it is. Things just keep getting more intense, keep getting more important as the season goes on and the opportunities start to thin out. They'll be back in action on Tuesday when they travel to Clemson. That's a 7:00 tip-off on ACC Network. We'll be there to deliver you all the coverage that you need from that game. But for now, I want to thank you all for tuning in to another Inside Pitt post-game report. We're headed out of here. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@InsideThePanthers, and follow our reporting at InsideThePanthers.com. Like I said, appreciate you all tuning in, and I'll see you next time.